There is no doubt that you have heard about the gut microbiome and how important it is to take care of that. Well, today we're going to talk all about it and do a deep dive into your gut health. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Move Daily Talks. I'm your host, Tracy Steen, and today I'm welcoming to the podcast Dr. Emily Leeming. Dr. Emily is a microbiome scientist, registered dietitian, former chef, and author of Genius Gut, a life-changing science of eating for your second brain. Dr. Emily is a research fellow at King's College London with multiple academic publications on nutrition and the gut microbiome. She writes for the Daily Mail and appears frequently in media, including Vogue, BBC Radio, The Sunday Times, Women's Health, and The Telegraph. I'm thrilled to be talking about this today because I know the importance of taking care of that gut, but even reading some of her stuff so far and part of her book there, I recognize there is so much that I still don't know about the gut microbiome, and I'm excited to get learning. Would you welcome with me, Dr. Emily? So the gut microbiome, this is such a big buzzword right now, and one that I'm excited to learn more about, to dive deeper into. Dr. Emily, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you. So great to be here.
And of course, you're the expert on this topic. So I would love to know, to start off with, why the gut microbiome for you? How did you get invested in this subject matter?
So for me, it really started with a book by Julia Enders. She's a gastroenterologist. And she wrote a book very at the beginning, before anybody was even talking about the gut microbiome in the public space, that was called Gut. And I, at the time, was about to go and do my training to be a dietitian. And it just opened up my mind that there was this collection of 100 trillion microorganisms that live in your lower large intestine, invisible to the naked eye, but yet so influential to our health. And that very much led me to then, after I completed my dietetic training, to go and do my PhD in diet and the gut microbiome. And I now work at King's College London as a researcher and have written a book on the gut-brain connection called Genius Gut. So it's very much just continuingly fascinating for me because it's such an early and evolving field too.
Yeah, and why that's confusing to me that it's just recent. Like we've obviously had our guts for years and years for our whole life. And but why just recently have we discovered that it's so important to our overall health?
Yeah, so it's really over the last 20 years, we've had, I'd say, almost a tsunami of research coming out in this area. And that's really because we've just finally had the technology to be able to understand not only who's there, but also what they're doing. But I would still say we're very much at the tip of the iceberg with this. Yes, we know that there's bacteria there. So some of these microbes are bacteria, but there's also viruses and fungi and another group of microorganisms called archaea, which are very similar to bacteria. And we don't know that much about them at all. It's really the bacteria that we talk the most about because we know most about them now. But there's so much that we still don't know. So just for kind of quantifying how our interest in this has expanded. 20 years ago, we maybe had a handful of research papers on the gut microbiome. We now have about 60,000, and that
Wow.
is increasing year on year. And I think we're just understanding how our gut microbes communicate to every single part of our body and how they're so interconnected with the entirety of our well-being.
Yeah, and I bet that just is so insightful into how to treat a person now as well. Like I think to a study that I heard about people's gut microbiome and how within the microbiome there was almost this predictor of whether the person would be obese or not obese. Um, could you talk to that a little bit?
We're seeing they have a very different gut microbiome, and this signals that perhaps there is, these gut bacteria are at play in why one kind of piece of the puzzle of why there might be differences.
That is really interesting. And I feel like when we like, okay, so as a trainer and someone who works in this fitness, wellness, nutrition space as well. A lot of people who come to me want to lose weight. And what I see in social media even is a lot of negativity around people who have obesity, right? And if you have it, you're just lazy, you don't do enough work. And when I read that study, and I think it was a twin study, which was really interesting, I thought, empathy needs to come into play here too, because there's so much more going on than I think we realize. And understanding this gut microbiome and its place and its role, especially in that for myself as a trainer, I think it's really crucial to understand that. And it can impact people in a different way.
Absolutely. I think we've got to really recognize how complex the story is around weight, how it can be very unique and different for different people. And I think understanding genetics having a factor, but this new player, this new piece of the puzzle being the gut microbiome too.
Can we talk a little bit about that gut microbiome and what role it plays in obesity? Like, what are we looking at here? And could you just talk to us a little bit about that?
The key thing is that there's a lot that we don't know about this relationship. There's a lot, this is a very early evolving field. But one key thing we do understand is that it's the gut bacteria playing a role in helping us to break down this food. They're helping us to take energy from it. And we get about 10 to 15% of the energy that we need from our gut bacteria breaking down this food. So it could be for people with obesity that our gut bacteria are effectively more efficient at breaking down that food and taking contributing that significant part of our energy balance. So for some people, it could be less. Some people who are living in larger bodies, it could be significantly more. It just means they have a more efficient gut microbiome at being able to kind of break down and give us that energy from food.
Okay, sorry, let me understand this. So if we have a very efficient microbiome that breaks down our food well, then then it could lead to obesity because it's so efficient that it's taking all of the energy into our bodies. Is that what you're saying?
That could be one
Yeah,
potential pathway that's contributing to the larger, bigger picture. And I think we think back to kind of caveman eras, that would have been incredibly protective. We'd have been
right.
very efficient at being able to get energy out of food. And that would meant that we'd be able to get through periods of famine and fasting. And so that was seen as being very protective. But of course, now we live in a very different environment where we don't need that to be happening. So we
Right.
don't need our gut bacteria to be that efficient.
Okay. Okay. I was under the impression that that's what we wanted to like increase is that efficiency of the gut microbiome, the breakdown of food. But what you're saying is that because it's so efficient, it's just holding on to all of these nutrients from the food and then not passing it through our bodies. Is that what you're saying?
So it's really both. So we do want our gut bacteria to be efficient in helping us to produce different vitamins, and we do want to get that significant portion of energy that we get from food through our gut bacteria. But it's whether with people who are living in larger bodies, having a lot of food coming in, lots of calories, whether that means that we're having a significant portion of that energy is then very easily taken into the body, more easily than if somebody in a smaller body was eating the same amount of food.
See, it's information like this that I feel is very interesting and important to know as well. Yes, choice comes into play, and that's a big part of the foods that we're choosing to eat and what we're choosing to do. But this is a factor too that can come into play. So if someone does have an overactive then ability within their gut microbiome to break down this food and store this energy, what can they do about that?
I really think it's quite a difficult one because it's not necessarily something that you can necessarily be that actionable about because really it's at the end of the day it does come down to the energy balance of the food you're eating. But we can still think about helping our gut bacteria to thrive because they're doing many things for our health, not just producing vitamins, not just helping break down our food, but also producing these special molecules which are called metabolites. And these effectively are absorbed into the body and they can travel to different organs, a bit like aid workers traveling to foreign countries. and they can then have a really important effect on the health of our organs across our body, from our brain to our heart to our lungs. So for me, the actionable part is, if we can maybe shift the narrative from kind of talking and focusing just about a number on the scale, but also just thinking about, what about my energy levels? What about how do I feel that I can, how is my digestion feeling? Am I feeling full and satisfied kind of for a long time? And also this connection we know between your gut and your brain, helping with your mood and with your cognition too.
I really appreciate that outlook, because that's what we're trying to do here at Move Daily Fitness as well. It's not just about aesthetics, but thinking that we are lifting weights, we're training, we're increasing our cardiorespiratory system for our health, right? For improved health span, for longevity, for feeling better, for more energy. And I think that shift is really important to have within yourself, because even when you don't see movement on the scale or you see shifts, you know internally that you're doing something fantastic for your body and your overall health. Now, you mentioned that connection between our gut microbiome and the brain. I would love to deep dive into this. So, again, we have that fodder, we have that knowledge that if we improve our gut health, we're actually improving our brain health as well.
Yeah, for a really long time, we've thought of the brain and the rest of the body as being separate. And we're now really understanding how untrue that is. The connection between our gut and our brain is not just the connection between our gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome is talking to the brain through those metabolites that I mentioned earlier, but also signaling through what's called the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve is kind of this highway, this direct route and road to your brain, between connecting your gut and your brain. This is a two-way street, so there's chat coming down from your brain, and there's also chat and a discussion coming up through your gut. Now, I think most of us, we all recognize the brain as being the CEO of the body, but actually 90% of this chat between the gut and the brain is actually the gut coming and talking back to the brain. So your gut bacteria are able to signal through the vagus nerve, and we see this very clearly in mice models. So this is a very early stage of when we look at research, yes, not in humans. But when we look at mice models, we see if you cut the vagus nerve, that certain bacteria that have been given as a probiotic then don't have that effect that they've been given. It completely stops. And that is very much just signaling that this is a mechanism, a way that the gut is talking to the brain. So we have the vagus nerve, we have the metabolites talking directly to the brain, and we also have your immune system. So 70% of your immune system lives in your gut. And there's lots of different then kind of more molecules talking to each other to then signal to your brain as well. And in particular, to go back to the metabolites, there's a group of metabolites that are produced when the gut bacteria feed on fiber. So fiber being the plant roughage from fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, and whole grains. And when these gut bacteria feed on fiber, it's their favorite food. It's like throwing them a feast, a birthday party. And they produce special metabolites called short-chain fatty acids. Now, short-chain fatty acids are what we get very excited about. They are anti-inflammatory molecules. They're able to signal to the brain and talk to the brain. They're able to help support the barrier lining around the brain, this protective fortress that we want to keep really nice and strong, because effectively we want to make sure any harmful molecules stay out and any nutrients that need to get to the brain are able to get in. So the short-chain fatty acids are playing a key role there, but also with the help of your gut lining as well, which has a very similar role in terms of being protective against the kind of murky matter in your gut and making sure that there's no trespassers into your bloodstream. So that's how your gut microbes are communicating. But we also know that your gut is called, effectively your second brain, because it contains this web of nerves that start in your esophagus and your throat and go all the way down to your bum. And these complex web of nerves are fine-tuned signaling again back to the brain. And this is why we understand, those phrases that we use in everyday language. We talk about gut feelings. We talk about when we're nervous or anxious, feeling sick to our stomach, having butterflies. this is the second brain in action. And I know we all know, perhaps, or perhaps experience that ourselves, someone who, if they get really stressed, needs to rush to the loo because their bowels have suddenly kind of gone swishy. And that is your second brain, again, in action, because it's incredibly complex, and fine-tuned control, and directly chatting to the first brain.
Fiber obviously is so important, as you've just said, to feeding that gut microbiome. And yet, there is a whole subset of people who have eliminated fiber from their diet and really believe that is what is making them healthier. So, what does that elimination of the whole macronutrient group, carbohydrates or fiber from their diet, what is that doing? They say they feel really good. And I'm thinking specifically of people who are possibly on the carnivore diet or keto diet. One of my friends' mothers, their own physician said that you don't need fiber, which is so ridiculous. But because it sounds like that is the nutrient that is feeding the health of our gut microbiome. So yeah, what is your thought on that? And when people just eliminate it from their diet, what is happening to the gut in that case?
Absolutely. And I think actually my response to this is I actually feel this applies to most of us, because most of us in the UK and in the US are incredibly deficient in fiber. I think the stats in the US are, by nearly 50% deficient, and in the UK by 40% deficiency. So that is a phenomenal gap that we're missing in the everyday population, without even going on a kind of carnivore diet and excluding any kind of fiber sources completely. What happens with our gut bacteria is that when they're not getting enough fiber, well, they can't go to the shops to pick up groceries like we can, right? Well, they are feeding on the foods that we are providing them.
Mm.
When they are not given enough fiber, they start to chew on the furniture, which is you, and your body. And this is effectively, particularly this lining of mucus, coating the insides of your gut. This is a very protective, important lining. It helps to keep any kind of molecules and bacteria away from your gut lining, which is very kind of protective, and lets things that we need to kind of pass on through into your bloodstream. So when that mucus gets fed on by the gut bacteria because they're hungry, that can mean that the gut lining becomes inflamed. It becomes the gaps between the cells can enlarge, which means that then trespassers and invaders can pass on through into your body and into your bloodstream. And again, this low state inflammation, this low grade inflammation can start, that we know is a risk factor for many conditions and diseases, and just general kind of ill health.
For an example, things like leaky gut, diverticulitis, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, even things, talk about heart disease, type 2 diabetes, depression, inflammation is really like the beginning
Sure.
stage of so many kind of illnesses and diseases. And I think we also think about, our gut bacteria, the long-term consequences of having a low fiber diet. You're then losing, the diversity of your gut microbiome. So diverse gut microbiome is a healthy gut microbiome. I think of it a little bit like, a company that you work at. You don't just have a marketing team. You need to have, your kind of product managers, and you need to have your kind of social team and your HR team, and all these different roles that get played within a company. It's very similar with your gut microbiome too. They're all doing very different things in your body. So not having enough food, not enough fiber, there's not enough to go around, and inherently some of those species can then die. And I think a really great example of that is just our Western way of life. If we look at the Hasta tribe in Tanzania, they are one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes. They are incredibly active. They eat about 80 grams of fiber a day.
I read that. That is because what are they eating? Just plants mostly?
They're hunting and foraging. They're killing their own foods. They're still eating meat, still eating animal products, but effectively whole animal foods. But a lot of kind of huge diversity of different plants that they're foraging, nuts and seeds, and kind of and different things. And that just means that, in conjunction, obviously, with the rest of their lifestyle, which is very microbe rich in terms of being outside a lot, in terms of moving your body. And in comparison, our Western way of life, we think that we've lost about 124 species because we are being very sedentary. We're not having a diverse diet. We're not eating enough fiber. And we're living in a very kind of clean, sterile environment and not outside kind of in nature with soil being incredibly microbe rich.
So when we're thinking about that fiber amount, I understand and have read that it's anywhere between that 25 and 30 grams per day for women. Is that what you would recommend as well? And if so, how do we, could you give us, could you give us some ideas on how we incorporate that amount into our day without maybe
Absolutely.
without getting too high in carbohydrates so that we can still attain our fat loss goals or our maintenance goals. A lot of people who come to me anyway are wanting to lose body fat. And one of the ways that we do that obviously is to be in that calorie deficit. And yet, for me, I always teach that everything on the plate matters. Like you've got to maximize everything that's on there for all of the targets that you have for yourself. So we've got to get that adequate protein. We want that healthy fat, but then we want that high fiber, complex carbohydrate as well. So how do we go about aiming for that 25 to 30 grams a day? And yeah, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. So for me, I definitely always say if we're starting with fiber, it's about starting low and going slow
Yeah.
because we know that it's like throwing an absolute, birthday party, rocket party for your gut bacteria. If you increase your fiber intake too quickly, then that can give you some digestive system symptoms just as your system is just rebalancing and recalibrating and getting used to it. So starting with about, anything kind of up to 5 grams to start with. And I think really let's talk in food terms because none of us really need to, want to spend all our time calculating what we're eating. So I talk about what I call the BGBGs. And this is
Okay.
effectively beans, berries, greens, grains,
Oh,
and
I
nuts
like
and
it.
seeds.
Beans,
Beans,
berries.
berries, greens. Well, I should have gone the other way around. Beans, beans, greens, berries, grains, and nuts and
Okay.
seeds.
I love it. Love it. Okay.
And for me, I say these are foods that you really want to try and get onto your weekly shopping list and making sure they are kind of essential parts of what you're eating. And the reason why beans, grains, and nuts and seeds are particularly on there is that I think a lot of our perception, perhaps with fiber, is that maybe it's all fruits and vegetables. And actually, fruits and vegetables, yes, are really great sources of fiber, but don't actually contain as much fiber as you can find in beans, grains, and nuts and seeds. So just to kind of give an example, so salad lettuce leaves contains about 1.8 grams of fiber per 100 grams. So that's about a bowl of lettuce. For just kind of half a can of chickpeas, that's 7 grams of fiber. So that's kind of, 4 or 5 times, kind of 3 to 4 times more than you would get from lettuce. So it's not about that it's about one or the other. It's about how can we get this range and diversity in. When we're talking about nuts and seeds, particularly chia seeds and flax seeds are very high in fiber. So just 2 tablespoons of flax seeds or chia seeds is 6 grams of fiber. So these are really kind of easy, simple things that we can be adding in. Berries I have on the list because they tend to be higher in fiber than most fruits and vegetables. And that's because they have the seeds in them. But they're also an incredibly rich source of what we call polyphenols. Now, this is a group of antioxidants that are really important for our brain health, but also help to feed our gut bacteria in a similar way to fiber. And so, yes, it's thinking about the BGBGs, but it's also thinking about the range of different colors that you have on your plate, because effectively this group of 8,000 polyphenols also give the color to the fruits and vegetables that we love. So, the red of a tomato to the purple of an eggplant. If we're getting a variety of different colors on our plates, we're getting a variety of different polyphenols too.
Yeah. One of the things I read, maybe it was in your book or on one of your newsletters, I can't remember, but we talk about this getting 30 plants in. And one of the things that you said about that is that it can be overwhelming to think, oh my goodness, how am I going to get 30 different plants a week? Yes, we want diversity, we want variety, we want to eat the rainbow. But if you're left to your druthers and have to count everything, it can be overwhelming. It's like, okay, I've got 4 plants here in this plate. Oh, I need 10 more today in order to reach my target. But what I loved so much, and I think this is the best tip, is you said to eat foods in combinations. So, like pre-mixed salads, mixed berries, mixed beans. And I love that. The other day when I read that, I'm like, okay, I was going to do a bean salad, make a cold bean salad for myself for the week. And I was going to put just black beans in it, but I'm like, why wouldn't I just get the variety can, which has black beans, broad beans, chickpeas? It had the whole gambit in it. And what a great tip. So tell us why that is so important.
I think really when it comes to nutrition, we've got to make it easy for ourselves. And I think it's so much easier to go to the supermarket with diversity in mind and think about, okay, I can get this variety pack of salad leaves, or we get these stir-fry veggie mixes in the UK. They're just kind of bags of different chopped veggies. You've probably got 8 or 9 plants in there alone. And I think that is such we've really got to recognize that we're all incredibly busy. We're all doing, 1,000 different things, spinning many different plates. If we can, straight away from the supermarket, from the get-go, make that something that is a simpler, easier choice for us, that's just going to be much easier than, panicking when you're already opening the fridge door saying, actually, what have I got here? What can I make? And I feel very strongly that, stress, particularly when we, over stressing about nutrition, can then actually end up being a negative thing. And we know for our gut bacteria, that's also a problem, that too much stress is then impacting on our gut and our gut microbiome as well. So yes, it's small, actionable, easy changes that suit you and your lifestyle, rather than having to stress over kind of lots of different things and worrying that you ate a tomato, on Monday, and therefore can't have one on a Wednesday, seems kind of a bit crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, so let's just practically tell our audience, then you could do, yes, mixed greens. So there's always those clamshells or those tubs of mixed lettuces, that have arugula and romaine and spinach all within it. That's a good idea. Mixed berries is a great thing. Costco always has the big bag of mixed berries. So why not get that instead of just your blueberries or raspberries? Mixed nuts, right? Mixed herbs. So those are the things that you would suggest. Mixed beans. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even if you get those frozen packs of smoothie mixes, that are effectively lots of different types of fruits kind of that are in there, you can add that to your smoothies, or even kind of cook that down in the winter into, something you could put on top of your porridge. We're big porridge eaters in the UK. I'm not sure if that's the same in the US.
Yes.
Um,
Oatmeal. Yeah.
yeah. And I think the nuts and seeds is such an easy way. I keep a jar in sight, because I think that's, key, that the snacks that you want to eat more of,
Yeah.
make them easier options. And having kind of a blend of different nuts and seeds already mixed, the fruit bowl, making sure that I have a variety of different fruit in there, rather than just like, an apple and an orange.
I think, there's some things that are my standards, my go-tos. Like I always make chia pudding and I add that to my Greek yogurt every single day. I have that. But then, yes, bringing in some diversity with the different fruits, right? With a different type of granola that I might make homemade granola with different nuts and seeds. So I like some of those standard things that I know are high in fiber, right? The chia seeds, the flax seeds, the berries, and then mixing it up with other parts just to increase that diversity.
Absolutely. I do that actually with Bircher muesli. That's a really great way to start the day. You can make that in advance. I can do it the weekends. And so I'll have my kind of roll cut oats with kefir, getting some fermented foods in there. And then you can add in, carrots, blueberries, nuts and seeds, chia seeds. And that means that you've got a high fiber breakfast that is ready to go. Prep that, 3 or 4 in advance. And you can, you're
Yeah.
starting the day in a great way if you're you and your gut bacteria.
Yeah. That sounds like, did you say carrots?
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit like, I call it kind of like a carrot cake,
Okay.
style kind of Bircher muesli, bit of cinnamon in there. So you have the
Okay.
carrot, cinnamon, maybe some apple, some blueberries.
Yeah, that's actually sounds really good. Let's just talk about this correlation between our gut health and our mental health. I just would love to dive deep into that because I know a lot of us are in that place where we suffer with certain mental health issues. I know in menopause, especially, a lot of women start to see more anxious symptoms, more depression. And I feel like this can be so multifaceted. It can be because we are declining in estrogen, but it can also be because we're in midlife and our children have just left the nest, or we're struggling in our relationship, or our job is overwhelming, or our parents are ailing. And these things can also heighten our mental health issues. But and then there's the gut microbiome, which can also play a part. So I would like to know your thoughts on the part that our gut plays. And do you think all of these things contribute to some of our symptoms within mental health?
Absolutely. So I think when it comes to food and mood, I think we've got to think of it as effectively an extra tool in the toolkit. So it's not that food is coming in and going to, cure every kind of mental health symptom that we might have, but it can be something that we can bring into play to help us feel better. And I think we really got to think about mental health as this spectrum where, yes, we have people, on the more the clinical side with clinical depression, but everyone experiences mental health every day. Mental health is, same as physical health, and really thinking about each day as, a piece of the puzzle of our life when it comes to our health. And today, how you feel today really matters in terms of your happiness, your mood, your cognition, so how well your brain is able to work. So I think I really want to kind of focus on that almost as much as, possibly talking about the clinical side.
Mhm.
So what happened in 2017, we had this landmark study on food and mood. It was the first dietary intervention for clinical depression using the Mediterranean diet. So this is a diet rich in plant foods and also kind of fatty fish like salmon, lots of whole grains, lots of nuts and seeds, extra virgin olive oil. So effectively a diet that your gut bacteria also really like. It's really, really very much a gut microbiome friendly diet. What they found was that those who were on the Mediterranean diet for 3 months, effectively a third of them at the end of the study did not have kind of clinical symptoms of depression anymore. And actually, the more that they improved their diet, the more their symptoms also dissipated. And this was, not done. They were still doing therapy. They were still taking medication. So this is again showing it's another tool in the toolkit. It's a complementary approach, but just showing that there is this, this kind of power of food to be able to support with our mental health and well-being. And we have seen this in other studies, again, looking at the same connection since. They didn't have enough funding to look at the gut microbiome at that point, especially kind of early on in microbiome research. It was incredibly expensive to take samples and be able to kind of analyze them. But what we've seen since, and I think we look back to these mice models as this early way of understanding what this relationship is, and then we see whether we see the same in humans. We've seen that, for example, by taking the poo from human people with depression. So if you think your poo is effectively contains a lot of your gut microbiome, and they transplanted this into the guts of rats. And what they found is that effectively it transferred the blues. So the rats then became depressed. And I think this is really important because we really want to show that actually there seems to actually be a knock-on effect, and it's not just that the gut microbiome changes or just a symptom of kind of ill health or what's happening already. So that's again a really interesting thing. Again, with our gut microbiome and depression, we see that those with depression tend to have a very different gut microbiome than those who don't have depression. They also have lower levels of those short chain fatty acids that we talked about being really important for your brain health. And they also seem to have a different, what we call kind of the way that tryptophan, this is an amino acid that is used for creating serotonin. The way that tryptophan is used in the body is different, it's imbalanced versus what somebody who doesn't have depression is. And that tryptophan piece is really important because serotonin is our happy neurotransmitter. It's made in our brain for our mood, and we need that tryptophan to arrive in the brain to be able to made into serotonin.
Very interesting. Isn't turkey high in tryptophan?
It is. So lots of protein-rich foods are high in tryptophan, but surprisingly, that doesn't necessarily mean that eating lots of protein-rich foods translates to us feeling happier. And the reason why we think that is that actually that tryptophan effectively has to kind of get into an elevator along with lots of other amino acids to be able to go up and shoot up to our brain. And there are lots of other amino acids that are kind of bigger and stronger and able to get in there first. So even though there's more tryptophan arriving, they're not actually able to fit into the lift, into the elevator, to be taken up. So that's where, I love this. It gets very complicated, but it's not quite as simple as usually the answer.
Yeah. I love your little illustrations. That's very helpful. What about probiotics, prebiotics? I'm under the impression that if I'm getting those adequate amounts within my food sources, that I don't necessarily need anything prescription or in a supplement form. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think we're overcomplicating gut health and it's becoming very commoditized and very expensive. And actually, really, it's those key core principles, getting enough fiber, thinking about diversity, thinking about those polyphenols. But I think when we think about probiotics and prebiotics, yes, there's some really interesting, great, strong research where we're seeing in human studies for certain types of probiotics and certain types of prebiotics that we can see them having an effect on cognition, on stress, on sleep. But the thing is it's complete Wild West out there in the market. So in Washington, D.C., there was a study where they looked at probiotics, the probiotics that are available from supermarkets and drugstores or what was an offer. And they found that only 30% of them actually contained the bacterial strain. So this is the type of bacteria that was in the correct dose to have an effect and actually had evidence behind them that
Right.
backed up the claims that they said they would. So if you want to take a probiotic for a specific reason, it can be really, really, really hard to understand which probiotic you can actually go for. And actually, for me, I would say for most people, that money that you're thinking of spending, you can invest that into something else, whether it's getting, some really delicious tomatoes that are going to encourage you to eat some more fruits and vegetables. Extra virgin olive oil is, very expensive. That can be a great thing to invest in. And, if it's getting some pre-cooked kind of whole grains or getting your nuts and seeds and just making life a bit easier for yourself to eat a more gut-friendly diet can actually be probably the best choice.
Isn't that funny that we're all willing to spend money on a probiotic because maybe we were influenced to purchase one, but we're like, well, the healthy food's too expensive. Can't buy that. It is expensive. I understand that. But it's funny that we want the supplement, we want the solution in pill form so often, as opposed to doing the hard work of incorporating the foods. Now, in terms of probiotic, prebiotic foods, can you just break down the difference between those two types of foods and then maybe give us some examples of what prebiotic foods are and what probiotic foods look like?
Absolutely. I think so. We're talking about fiber. I'll start with prebiotic. So
Okay.
prebiotic foods tend to be effectively they're foods, they're substances which feed your gut bacteria to have a health effect. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be fiber. It can be things like omega-3s, polyphenols have been shown to have a probiotic like or called to be having prebiotics. When we talk about prebiotics, though, in general, we are tending to talk about probiotic fiber. And this just means that there are lots of different types of fibers, and there are certain types of fibers that your gut bacteria particularly able to feed on and really, really enjoy. So foods that contain those are garlic, onions, beans, leeks, asparagus, chicory root, Jerusalem artichokes. So really great sources of these fibers. But again, it's thinking about providing your gut bacteria with a diversity of different plant foods, because all these different plant foods are going to contain different fibers that are really important for your gut health as well as the rest of your health. When we're talking about probiotic foods, actually it's a little bit of a misnomer, because really what we're talking about is fermented foods. We don't necessarily know that they're probiotic food, because the official definition of a probiotic is a live bacteria in an adequate dose that has a specific health effect. And while a lot of these fermented foods will contain these different types of probiotics, we don't actually know if they're in large enough doses to have that specific health effect. So it's not to say that they're not doing great things, but we don't know whether we can give them an official title of probiotics unless the companies feel they want to do some kind of very rigorous analysis to show that they're in there at the right quantities. But that's kind of a little bit of just kind of background there. So
Yeah.
fermented foods are foods that have been, the starch and the sugars in the food have been fermented by live microbes, usually bacteria and yeast, that are found in the food or in the environment naturally. And they are able to break down those starches and sugars and produce some vitamins. They can make some of the nutrients more available. They can help with some of the digestibility of the food. And they, change the flavor and the palatability. And if you're eating them raw and live, then you can then be giving your gut bacteria a new kind of live dose of microbes too. So things like that would be kefir, kombucha, kimchi, kraut, but also things like yogurt, cottage cheese. Lots of different cheeses are kind of all fermented, sourdough bread, lots of other different fermented foods that are available, and not just the ones that we think of most of the time.
Yes, that is a good list. I have been putting sauerkraut just on my salad. And I think it's important to, this is what I've read, maybe you can confirm this, is that you want to buy that live in your refrigerated section of the grocery store, not in a tin can on the shelf, correct?
Absolutely. And I think sauerkraut is a confusing one because it is available on the shelf and in the refrigerated section. But generally, if we think about how these live microbes they're still present and they're still available. So they need to stay in the refrigerated section. Otherwise, they are going to go into overdrive and you're going to end up with exploding kind of jars and cans going everywhere, which is why they're in the refrigerated section and not in any other section. So yes, if you're looking for a live ferment, it will be in the refrigerated section.
And it's such an easy add. You just add a couple tablespoons onto your salad. It's a little bit sour and crunchy. Then with your homemade dressing, I just love it. I think it's such an easy way to add that and get that in. I know people are going to ask or be concerned about the gas that comes from beans, the bloating possibly that comes from beans. We love beans for the fiber content, but and the protein content in there as well, especially if you're a vegetarian or vegan and that's your go-to. But for a lot of people, there's a lot of gas and bloating that accompanies that consumption. How do we avoid that, or can we?
Absolutely. So I find this really quite interesting because actually they have done a study on this to show actually how many people do actually get more gas. And there's only kind of 50%, half of us actually get more gas from eating beans and half of us don't. And I think maybe it feels like we maybe get more gas because it's within that hour afterwards. But actually, if we look across the span of the day, it's not actually as much. So just to put some people at ease, it's not kind of everybody.
Right.
When it comes to having a bit of gas, actually, that is kind of a sign of a happy gut microbiome. A little bit of bloating after a meal for that kind of hour or so, a little bit of gas is effectively your gut bacteria saying, I've had a really good meal, I've broken down this fiber, and one of the byproducts they produce is gas, which is why we do tend to feel a bit of bloating and a bit of gas after a meal. So that's not necessarily anything to worry about too much. If you are finding it difficult and uncomfortable, then there are a few tips and tricks that you can do if you're having painful symptoms from having too many beans or too much fiber. When it comes to your beans, you can make sure that you rinse them So that just helps to take away some of the kind of less digestible parts. And also having canned beans rather than kind of home cooked beans can also be easier to digest. And I think the key thing for everyone is, again, to go back to that low and slow message. So if you are going straight in and having a can of beans, you might end up having uncomfortable symptoms. But yeah, or if you're, particularly sensitive to it, for example, can you actually just kind of start with maybe a tablespoon, see how you go, slowly up it. And you do find that naturally over time, that your gut bacteria should get used to it and your gut, and that should become more comfortable, rather than saying, oh, I can't have this, I'm going to cut this out completely, unless you have a particular intolerance or something.
Yeah, good advice. Is there anything that's coming up in the gut health world, in the gut microbiome world, that you're excited about? Anything that's any research that's on the horizon?
I think I think the research that's coming out in the field of the gut-brain connection. I mean, my colleagues at King's College London earlier this year, for example, had a research paper of a study that found that taking a probiotic fiber supplement, so this was inulin and fructooligosaccharides, so older adults, so people who were kind of 60 years or older, so they took this supplement for 3 months. And they found that they performed better on memory tests that are often used in early stages of Alzheimer's in comparison to the placebo. So I think a large portion of this could be that because we already have a big fiber deficit, that actually it makes a huge impact on us being able to get enough fiber. And so every little counts, in comparison to us perhaps already getting enough of something. If we add more in, it doesn't necessarily give us extra benefit. But really kind of highlighting this gut-brain connection. And I think the other thing for me is very much moving away from the conversation from who those gut bacteria are, but actually onto what are they doing and what are the metabolites they're producing, and really thinking more about the specific types of metabolites and their actions.
All right. Well, that is just such interesting information. I'm very excited to, again, go back to looking at the amount of fiber that I'm adding, ensuring that when I look at my plate, I have those fiber sources. I have the diverse sources. So I'm looking at getting the multiple different types. I like the BG, berries, greens, beans,
Grains,
and
beans, grains,
grains.
seeds.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. I think that's such an easy thing that we can, again, look at our plate and say, do I have these components on my plate? And again, just considering how much, if we attend to our gut health, it's going to improve our mental health. It's going to improve our brain health, our energy. And for me, that is crucial as I age. I want to feel like my best self. And I think looking at my nutrition and my health that way is definitely going to help me do that. Thanks, Emily, for all of your insight today. It was really helpful for our audience, I'm sure. Where can people find you? What social handles or your website? Of course, I want you to mention your book a little bit here as well, so that we can follow you for further information.
Absolutely. So my Instagram is Dr. Emily Leeming, so Leem for mother, ING. And then I'm quite active on Substack, which is a kind of email newsletter platform. So my newsletter is called Second Brain. And so I share recipes, but also deep dives in the gut-brain connection. And I feel very strongly about the recipes in actual parts. Actually, my first career was as a chef. So that's kind of been a big picture, kind of across my career. And then also you can find my website, www.dremilyleeming.com. And my book is called Genius Gut, The Life-Changing Science of Eating for Your Second Brain.
Love it. And I just look forward to finishing that book. So far, it's been amazing. But I will put all of those links below in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. Thanks for joining, everyone. As always, go move daily in your gut health, in your fitness, wellness, and nutrition. And I'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.